Hello again. Our next speaker gave me a great deal of gratification when he decided to accept my offer to the DCA forum. Dan from Amgen is going to be talking about their enterprise data fabric and how they're using a data-first approach in their product group. So Dan, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thanks for the intro, Steve. Appreciate it. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks to Semantic Arts for the opportunity to present at the forum. I'm Dan Gschwend, business product owner of Amgen's Enterprise Data Fabric. I'm here representing my co-product owners, David Holm and Nancy Lair, and I believe David might be here somewhere in the audience as well. Data-centric architecture has been a career-long passion of mine, and it's a real treat to get to talk to this community of friends of data, frankly. So what I wanted to share with you all today is our journey to data centricity at Amgen. I'll cover a bit about our vision, our approach, and a view to our transformation in progress, as well as some lessons learned along the way. And much like Jay's talk yesterday about Intuit's journey, this won't be a technology talk. If there's one thing I can lay out right from the start, it's that data centricity is not a technology problem. It's really a mindset and a cultural shift. So what I hope to lay out over the next half hour is how we've managed to move a large organization with a historically more traditional approach to information architecture toward data centricity. So let me start with a brief introduction to Amgen. Looks like Matt's already got the slide up, and some context for our journey. So Amgen is one of the world's largest biotech companies and a pioneer in biomanufacturing and human genetics research. We're focused on serious human disease, and our mission simply is to serve patients. We're founded in 1980, and today are a Fortune 500 company employing about 20,000 staff. Proud to have over 20 products on the market spanning 6 different therapeutic areas, a presence in about 100 countries, and reach millions of people around the world. So Amgen is deeply rooted in science and innovation, and we firmly believe that data is at the core of our entire life cycle of discovering, developing, and delivering life-changing treatments. So next slide, please. So as such, we have a very rich data lake history, and you can see a bit of our maturation and technology trajectory here. Like most large companies, our early data lakes focused more on big data analytics and co-location than they did on data centricity and semantics. So from an information architecture perspective, we had a large hill to climb. Early on, we had some great success with our Hadoop-based data lake, deploying an award-winning R&D analytics platform. And a little under 5 years ago, we began to transition from static clusters to fully cloud-native elastic data lakes based in AWS. But we're still very much project or application focused at that time in how we used our data lake. Everyone brought and used their own data to solve their own problems, just using shared infrastructure. So I had long been lobbying for a corporate data fabric predicated on semantically connected data, and finally formalized a vision around it in the 2018 timeframe. And while I got some great reception from the CIO and his leadership, we really needed a customer to bring it to life. Fortunately, there was a progressive business-led data strategy initiative out of our operations function that was also getting off the ground at the same time, seeking to institutionalize durable data-centric capabilities. And it's that confluence that I'll talk a bit more about shortly, as it was critical to launching our transformation to a semantic-centric approach for driving data centricity and underpinned by a corporate knowledge graph. Next slide, please. So from a macro perspective, if we look back, say, 10 or 15 years, despite all the incredible functional success we've had in data and analytics, we still suffered largely from 4 main challenges. And not surprisingly, those challenges stem from the FAIR principles. First, we had a data accessibility problem in that there's really poor visibility to the data we had available to us. Even if you knew where the data was, you probably still had a lot of hurdles in getting access to it. And that naturally spawned a lot of redundancies. Secondly, we had technical interoperability challenges from a highly heterogeneous architectures across and even within our functional areas. Third, like most companies, we suffered from a lack of semantic interoperability that allows that seamless data integration both within and across functions and to the outside. And finally, being largely technology and project focused, we didn't really have a culture of data sharing or reuse, nor really good incentives to do so. So the upshot being that folks tended to ideate with the data they had at hand rather than the data they actually needed, and might be available to them elsewhere across the company. And it's really these last two challenges that our data fabric vision really sought to shine a bright light on. So next slide. The vision quite plainly was to be able to bring together the totality of Amgen's data as a united enterprise to drive business insights and decisions, not just for the problems that we understood today, but of course for all the unanticipated needs in the future. And the notion of data connectivity, it was intrinsic to that value proposition. So in our conceptualization, data centricity and reuse is fundamentally fueled by connectivity. And connectivity, certainly in my opinion, is best represented as a graph. And that led to a number of design choices. But because of how we funded initiatives, we really need a customer willing to invest in the vision. And as I mentioned earlier, we're super fortunate to have a progressive business-led data strategy initiative spinning up, which sought to institutionalize these durable capabilities. Yep, okay, now go to the next slide, thanks. And that program, called Operations Data Strategy, the pitch for which is sort of laid out here, was driven by our operations function, which at Amgen covers process development, manufacturing, supply chain, quality, and engineering. And it was a very deep commitment from the top to invest in durable capabilities around people, process, technology for three key areas: data science, data fabric, and data governance. And the program was crafted as a self-funded journey toward that very ambitious destination of what amounts to a fully digital, connected, end-to-end process development, manufacturing, and supply chain ecosystem. Being self-funded, the journey was framed to deliver real value in the near term for key business questions about our products and our ability to supply and react to a changing market, while at the same time deploying these durable data foundation and cultivating teams skilled in these new ways of working with data. I think it was Ashley who commented at the panel discussion earlier this week on Monday that executives don't buy journeys, and that's certainly consistent with why the program was structured the way it was. And we're very lucky to have this incredible visionary of a woman named Janet Cheatham at the helm of this data strategy initiative, because she instinctively gets this value proposition of an economy around model-driven data. There's always this healthy tension to deliver app-driven value along the way, but she lives and breathes the data-centric long game. And it's her clarity of data-centric destination, in fact, that's what actually inspired me to move out of IT for the first time in my career and move into the business to work directly for her and bring this shared vision to life. So on the next slide, that shared vision was underpinned by three strategic pillars, and democratized, fluid, and connected. So democratized meant that we unlock data from our data providers once, and we do it robustly. So instead of everyone having to go back to the well to get their own portions of data and hoarding and transforming in their own specialized ways, we'd extract the data from the sources in their entirety into the data lake once using standard patterns. And that in turn ends up addressing a lot of the technical interoperability challenge I described earlier, since it also provides that cohesive access path to the company's data in a performant and secure way. Fluid meant a transformational shift to more progressive data movement technologies to reduce data latency throughout our entire stack. And that meant investment in streaming and near real-time data movement technologies like AWS Kinesis, instead of relying solely on traditional batch ETL sorts of patterns. And it's really game-changing for living analytics when you tell a data scientist or an end user that they no longer have to worry about how stale their data is. I mean, it's pretty cool to see how their eyes and ears perk up. And finally, connected speaks to the semantic interoperability of the data for cross-functional leverage. And this is the one that I'm the most passionate about, and I find by far the hardest one to communicate and instill. It's fundamentally thinking about what the data and what the data mean, instead of just focusing on technologies and data movement. And so I like to think of all the systems we build in IT as the buckets. Not quite ready for that one yet, Matt. And the data as the liquid. And at the end of the day, we need the free-flowing liquid, not the buckets, to answer our business questions. And so I'll be a bit provocative here. And while I don't want to make any sweeping generalizations, I do wonder whether IT organizations on balance are training to build ever better buckets, when in some sense it works at odds to the focus on that liquid data that we all need to set free. So one of the paradigm shifts we've been trying to make is getting people to think more about the fitness of data for consumption as compared to its creation. And so on the next slide, what do I mean by that? When you look at how data gets created and moves through our architectures, we see three main flows of information. The generational flow at the bottom is where data gets created in the course of a business process. And the operational flow is how data is then moved and transformed through an IT stack. And then the consumption flow is how data is organized, integrated, and aggregated to drive insight. And historically, we focus an awful lot on A, the generational flow. But today's business questions are increasingly cross-functional and don't align to neat silos. So as a data consumer, I need to be able to pull data from wherever it was created to allow me to be curious and comprehensive in how I can answer questions. So the shift to consumption flows means, at a first approximation, at least two major things. One, we don't really care about how or where the data was generated. And two, we need to be able to interact with the data in business terms. And so on the next slide, architecturally, that leads us to this really simple analogy. We've basically got hundreds of farms of data, some of them farming the same kind of data. But if I'm looking to make, say, a strawberry, avocado, and arugula salad, I don't really care about all the intricate details of how my strawberries were farmed and how that might be different for avocados. I just want to be able to walk into a well-organized market and fuel my creative data cooking needs. I don't need a manual to use a grocery store. The store is laid out in an organized fashion. Like products are located together. They're labeled consistently. They have labels in the same language and prices are in the same currency, etc. Right? So in our architecture, the data fabric is decomposed into two key layers. The consolidation layer in the middle here is the distribution center, effectively, where we democratize access to the source data and avoid consumers from having to go back to the farms to get the data. We also bring in all the data from the farms, not just parts of it. It's effectively the best version of the source. And the semantic layer is our information model-based knowledge graph that's defined in business terms. And in our architecture, we actually materialize this both in graph and relational forms. And I'm happy to talk more about that in the breakout. Operationally, we execute through two different agile product teams, one to move the data from the farms to the consolidation layer, and a separate team to model and engineer the data for the semantic layer. And so at the end of the day, consumers don't need to know how to negotiate hundreds of systems to interact with data, nor do they need to know SAP's cryptic German-derived acronyms for accessing ERP source data. So over time, we want our applications to reduce their footprint by using shared data further up the stack, particularly from the semantic layer. Now I'll get back to how we organize the grocery store in a bit, but first I just want to highlight that the semantic layer is where this critical pivot to the data first and model first mindset is absolutely essential. So on the next slide, this is probably old hat for this audience, but I think it bears repeating. Traditionally, when we build applications, we start with a set of business questions, we source and understand the data we need, align the data to the application, and then publish it for use by that application. The increment is sort of the next business question. We rinse and repeat. In the model-driven approach, we start with a business information model. And this is where the whiteboard is your best friend. We'll often consider a whole range of data sources, even beyond the ones we're looking to assimilate, just to get the broader semantic context on how the data naturally want to be represented. And it's a great place to draw inspiration from the external world, right? Get out of the sand. And then we align the source data to the model and publish it for use by different applications, many different applications. And the net footprint of each application is therefore smaller. And the increment is the reusable data asset, and that's the key distinction. And I'll come back shortly to how we define what a reusable data asset is. So on the next slide, let me just summarize where we're at here. When we pull this all together, we end up with a conceptual picture that looks like this. And it's tied back to the FAIR challenges I outlined at the beginning. We have this consolidation layer that's organized by source system and addresses the basic data democratization and technology interoperability challenges. And the semantic layer provides that critical semantic interoperability. And again, in our architecture, we manifest it in both graph and relational forms. And then we have a custom data catalog called the data marketplace that spans both to provide visibility and accessibility across the stack. The business glossary in the data catalog for our semantic objects is driven directly from our ontologies, right? So there's a beautiful marriage there. So let me get back now to the question of how we organize our data assets in the semantic layer. You'll see at the top, there's this little hexagon-ish metaphor in the cartoon for the semantic layer. And that's because on the next slide, we use a honeycomb of data domains as a map for our semantic layer. And this is one shared picture for the entire company. The cells, I'm only showing a few of them here, but they each represent a data domain within these larger countries of data. And we often call this our Catan game board and the conquest map. The blue mountains in the middle represent our core of products, patients, and providers because of their importance in prosecuting Amgen's mission to serve patients. The rest of the cells are generally named after a key business noun, and they are laid out with some very intentional natural semantic connectiveness. It was actually surprisingly non-trivial to put a diagram like this together. And it's really important to note that what's on here is deliberately crafted not to represent organizational structures or business processes, but rather data domains that drive insight. And it's this simple honeycomb that has been one of the most powerful aligning artifacts in our journey. It allows us to align the business and IT on what the scope of the fabric looks like. It allows us to capture data demand across business questions and application teams. It allows us to portray where we are working and where we're headed on the roadmap. It highlights natural data adjacencies, which we use as opportunistic detours in our modeling. It provides a framework into which we actually organize all of our ontologies. And it even allows us to heat map data quality issues. So critically, it also provides the map by which consumers can find the data that they're looking for. So our actual representation of this is itself data-driven. So we can literally light it up by different dimensions, whether it's demand, roadmap, release status, or you name it. It's incredibly powerful. It's far from perfect, but the simplicity of it has been an absolutely key success factor. Everyone needs some kind of mental framework for organizing what they're seeing and hearing, and this has become that thing. So earlier I mentioned that we build in terms of reusable data assets, and that amounts to iteratively building out ontologies that align to these domains. So on the next slide, we can peek at, to zoom in at a couple of our cornerstone domains of products, facilities, and geographies. There's nothing really surprising here. Within each of these domains, let's see the hexagons, there's a conceptual information model and an ontology, of which I'm showing some vastly simplified constellations here. The information models themselves have no references to systems. The URI, our URI policy has no systems or organizational structures within it either. And the magic, as you all know, is that when you start building these domain-based ontologies, they naturally start snapping together and allowing traversal in terms of business concepts. So this is the durable abstraction that avoids having to negotiate system-specific constructs that are typically built for transactional needs. So because our models are largely built in system-independent fashion, they're also designed, therefore, to accommodate new sources of like data as systems may come and go. So these are the canonical models that will align our data toward, and they represent that sort of default model in the absence of anything else. From a consumer's perspective, this is a lot more intuitive to understand in terms of business concepts. And what it enables as you start to scale it, of course, is the ability to answer real business questions. So on the next slide, a couple more conceptual representations of some of the domains with some extended connectivity across them. And we can game out some simple business questions like how to react to changes in commercial demand for a particular product and how that translates into my manufacturing or supply plans. Or if there's a geographically localized event, say a hurricane or a pandemic outbreak, how can I trace that to the impact on my supply chain and how I might respond, right? So again, these are simplified examples, but portrayed this way helps leadership understand what connected data actually means. And one of the main challenges, honestly, is explaining to leaders what connected data is in a way they can explain it. And that's just one key to help fuel your data-centric movement, is to make the concepts more visceral for your advocates. So on the next slide, if you extend the concept and zoom out a bit more, you start to realize this vision of using the honeycomb as a menu of data driving answers to a wide array of business questions, from the pandemic impact kinds of questions we just talked about, to aggregating data for regulatory submissions, or identifying root cause related to complaints about products, or the perennial customer 360 view that everybody wants. Right, so this is where we really start to see the reuse power of the shared data-centric assets engineered in business terms. And it begins to drive that reduction in application footprints and enables a little more fluidity in spinning up and down apps around evolving business questions by using this durable shared base of semantically well-engineered data. So of course, this doesn't happen without a whole cast of data-oriented roles to make data centricity real. And on the next slide is a slew of them, and I don't have time to go through all of them. But roughly speaking, we have a broad set of roles across IT in the business to make the data-centric journey real. And down the left-hand side, we have a set of roles that we use on our Semantic Layer Agile product team to build out the data domains, and these span modeling, semantic engineering, and DevOps kind of roles, and of course the business domain experts. And down the right-hand side are a set of governance-related roles that allow us to make consumption-oriented data quality a first-class citizen. Data quality from a consumption perspective is actually quite different from data quality from a transactional generation perspective. And we have a comprehensive set of data confidence metrics that help to shape that. For data centricity, you need metrics far beyond the basic stuff, like whether mandatory columns have values or whether they are typed as ints or strings. Right? You need metrics that drive connectivity, like ensuring that all data is fully defined in reference to other data, and the degree to which you have reuse of shared terms. As well as reasonability metrics that measure the fitness of your data relative to prior distributions or expectations. So there's a lot more you need to be data-centric beyond sort of the basic kinds of data quality metrics that folks might be accustomed to. Now, our data governance forums are business-led. Some are tied to data domains and some are tied to value streams. But they all come with new data-related roles and responsibilities that allow us to evolve our business processes to better infuse data quality. In a number of cases, the forum owners actually also control the SOPs for how data gets created, and that offers tremendous leverage. So on the next slide, if I can just summarize our journey to date, starting at the lower left, I talked about that early spark between the vision for data centricity and the business-led investment in durable capabilities, the magic of that confluence. In the early days, we did a lot of property graph kinds of visual prototypes to make the notion of connected data real for leadership and to let them touch the data. And that was incredibly helpful in teeing up our subsequent investments in a rich RDF OWL and shackle-based information architecture and supporting technology platforms. We talked about the honeycomb as a way to organize our data domains, and we've deployed our first pass through about a half a dozen domains so far, and starting with some real anchors in the corporate knowledge graph. So we've invested a lot in what we call disambiguation services. These are the APIs that help turn strings into things and map dirty or divergent data onto the shared URIs and start that virtuous cycle of converging data where no difference is actually necessary. So now we have a very rich honeycomb roadmap of data domains ahead, and that's driven both by business priorities as well as by the adjacency opportunities. We actually use now the innate connectivity of the data itself as a prioritization factor in what order we should traverse through this honeycomb. And to be clear, we fully planned to make multiple iterative passes through each cell. It's not a one and done sort of approach as you hit a cell. So what we're actively doing now is taking out technical debt from existing application footprints and starting to see decreased time to value and a more converged data experience in new applications that are being built. We're also looking to reimagine some thorny data challenges using the power the graph is uniquely well positioned for, such as pathfinding, genealogy, and centrality kinds of analyses. So there's a whole new world of possibilities here. Thomas, I believe, talked about bills of materials yesterday. And that's also a place we're seeing immediate benefits in data transparency at a very early stage. So a key focus for us now is partnering with data scientists and application teams to help them embrace these new ways of working with data. So I'll just wrap up with some learnings along the way. Hopefully they'll serve as useful tips for others that are embarking on this journey. On the challenges side, installing a mindset of data over technology has been the #1 challenge and something that I have to work at day in and day out. It's sadly not natural for most folks outside this audience. Conveying what connected data means to leadership in a way they can explain is critical. So make sure you arm yourself with examples and analogies that will work in your environment. Since graph was a big part of our journey, this has been and continues to be a large hurdle for the relationally minded folks. Of most of us probably came from the tabular heritage. And I can say, though, that one of my product team members was perhaps my greatest graph skeptic early on, living and breathing relational as all of us did. But today, he's my greatest advocate on graph and RDF, even running learning sessions and mentoring new folks in this space. So on the bright side, it is possible, but it does take a lot of time and energy. Graph is fundamentally a different way of thinking than relational. So a couple of comments regarding approach. We have a hybrid graph and relational deployment, as I've mentioned, and that has caused some issues with agility. I'll be perfectly candid. Happy to go into that in the breakout. There's a much longer story there. One of the things that I fight constantly is the scaling too fast problem, or the people wanting to be in the fabric for the wrong reasons. And there are cases where the fabric is now organizationally seen as the way forward, but the local mindset isn't necessarily there yet everywhere to really internalize what that means or what it requires. And so there's a lot of danger with this if you don't set yourself up operationally and technically to support cooperative construction in a way that preserves sort of the holistic health of the shared fabric. And finally, you have to have a slew of new or more formalized data-related roles and specialized talent to be successful here. In my experience, the knowledge scientist role is by far the most influential and also by far the hardest to find. On the success factors side, on the next slide, for doing this sort of thing at a large organization at scale, you naturally need good sponsorship. And I talked about that confluence between vision and having a customer who intrinsically gets data centricity is really important. And there's an ocean of a difference between somebody saying they believe data is an asset and really knowing what that means. Data fabrics are a really progressive space and taking off like wildfire. It's really important to afford the time and space to your team to learn and innovate, to keep up with all the advances the industry is making. And this is not traditional stuff. As for conviction, this is something I've been working at toward my entire career. So my only advice here is don't give up. We all know it's worth it. Fundamentally, data centricity is a long game. And you have to find the right partners to make it real. I can say that small steps like the highly visual, interactive, connected data prototypes I mentioned were really helpful in making the light bulbs go off for people. On the approach side, the honeycomb, I talked about that. Again, that's the mental framework that's super helpful to give your stakeholders something to hang on to. And naturally, you need to build iteratively in small chunks, informed by business priorities. Be agile. You won't get it. You won't get it all right the first time. You'll always want to maintain a broad perspective in your modeling. I think that's clear. But at the end of the day, be cautious about being overly theoretical constructs. Your models have to be approachable, and at the end of the day, you have to be able to handle your actual data in any practically useful environment. So I think your stance on open world versus closed world modeling is actually really relevant here. So, finally, talent. There's so much to learn and grow in this space. So you do have to invest in your talent, create curricula, embrace learning, and by all means, let them learn by doing. This gets back to the earlier point about having the space to innovate. At the end of the day, you've got to have some exceptional knowledge scientists to be successful. These are the people that naturally think in data abstraction, classification, and relationships. They get your business, They can communicate ideas with insane clarity, and they know how to interact with people. It doesn't take many, but these folks are like gold. In the end, as others have also described, this journey is really a cultural shift. So I do think embracing new ways of working with data will be key for your success as well. I'll stop there. That wraps up our story so far on our transformation towards data centricity. I hope you found it helpful. It's really great to have this community to work toward the same mission and learn from each other. I'd certainly be happy to share updates in the future as our journey unfolds. Thanks so much for the attention, and I look forward to digging deeper in the breakout. I believe we'll be in Q&A room 2. Thanks so much, and enjoy the last day of the conference.